For 5 days, I tracked my fiancé's every move. What I saw in that hotel parking lot destroyed everything. I never thought I'd be the kind of man who followed his fiancée around. To the outside world, Natalie and I looked picture perfect. We lived in a modest but warm apartment just outside the city. We were planning a wedding that her family seemed more excited about than she did, and we had the kind of social media presence that made people comment, couple goals. But I had started to notice the cracks. And once I saw them, I couldn't look away. It began small. A week before, she started keeping her phone face down at dinner. When I asked about it, she laughed it off, saying she didn't want work emails ruining our evening. I didn't push, but that laugh lingered in my head longer than it should have. The following night, I woke up around 1 in the morning to use the bathroom, and she wasn't in bed. The glow of her phone lit up the living room. She was typing furiously, smiling at the screen. When she noticed me in the doorway, she jumped. She claimed it was her friend Dana venting about a breakup. But Natalie hated Dana. They hadn't spoken in months. That was when I knew something was wrong. The next day, she left early for work without her laptop. I found it odd, since her company always expected her to be logged in. Instead of heading to the office, she went downtown and spent 2 hours at a cafe, scrolling her phone and scribbling notes on napkins. I would have shrugged it off if it hadn't been followed by her pulling $400 in cash from an ATM on the other side of town. When I asked about it later, she said she bought groceries. Our fridge was nearly empty. By then, the suspicion was a knot in my stomach that never loosened. I confided in my oldest friend, Scott, over a beer. Scott had known me since high school. He told me I was spiraling, that every couple has secrets, and that Natalie was probably planning a surprise for me. Maybe she was stressed with the wedding. But Scott also knew me well enough not to dismiss me completely. If you really think something's up, he said, find out. Don't live with half answers. So I made the decision. I would track her for 5 days. 5 days of observation, no confronting, no accusations. I would know if my fiancée was who I thought she was. The first morning, I followed her car as discreetly as possible. I had borrowed Scott's older Toyota sedan. My own car was too recognizable. She drove the familiar route toward her office, but halfway there, she took an unexpected exit. She parked near a boutique clothing store and went inside. 20 minutes later, she came out with a shopping bag and tossed it into her trunk. That wasn't unusual in itself, but when she got back into the car, she didn't head toward her office. She drove in circles for a while, eventually pulling into a small cafe near the university campus. I sat in the corner, pretending to read the paper. She met with an older woman I didn't know. The woman was polished, probably in her 50s, wearing a navy blazer even though the day was warm. They spoke intently, leaning close, but there was no warmth in Natalie's face, just tension, sharp and serious. The woman handed Natalie a folder. Natalie slipped it into her purse. Then they hugged stiffly, like acquaintances pretending to be close. I wrote it down in the notebook I had started for this project. Day 1. Unknown woman. Folder exchanged. Tense conversation. That night, Natalie came home cheerful, almost too cheerful. She made pasta, poured me wine, and asked about my day. I studied her face across the table. There was nothing visibly different, except I knew she was lying about something. When I asked how her office was, she said it was the usual grind. She didn't mention the boutique or the cafe. She didn't mention the woman with the folder. The second day pushed my suspicion into something heavier. Natalie left home claiming she was heading to a client meeting. Instead, I watched her drive across town and park near a restaurant by the river. A man was waiting outside. He looked mid-40s, sharp suit, expensive watch. His demeanor was strange, too formal to be casual, too intense to be strictly professional. They went inside together. I followed after a few minutes and sat at a table near the back. Their conversation was hushed, leaning across the table, but I caught glimpses of it in their body language. She was nervous, tapping her nails against the glass of water. He spoke calmly, gesturing as if giving instructions. At one point, he slid an envelope across the table. She placed it in her bag quickly, scanning the room as if to check who might be watching. I felt my pulse hammer in my throat. It wasn't a date. It wasn't flirtation. It was something else, something businesslike and secretive. When they parted, he didn't kiss her. He simply shook her hand. But her face carried the same tension as it had with the older woman. That night, she came home tired and quiet. She didn't cook. She said she had a headache and went straight to bed. I checked her purse when she showered. The envelope was gone. By the third day, my obsession was total. I barely slept, eating fast food between long hours in the car, trailing her movements across the city. She seemed to live 2 parallel lives. To me, she was still the affectionate fiancée, talking about floral arrangements and wedding guest lists. But during the day, she slipped into shadows I had never known existed. That morning, she didn't even pretend to go to work. Instead, She drove to a rundown part of town. She parked outside a small jewelry store, the kind that also bought gold and silver. I watched her carry a small box inside and emerge empty-handed 20 minutes later. She looked over her shoulder before getting back into her car. An hour later, she met someone new, a young man in his 20s with messy hair and nervous energy. His name, I learned from the barista who greeted him, was Kevin. They sat together in a corner booth, talking quickly. Unlike the others, Kevin seemed anxious, almost desperate. At one point, he slid his phone across the table, showing her something. Natalie frowned, shook her head, and scribbled something on a napkin. I couldn't hear them, but I could see her face. It wasn't love. It wasn't friendship. It was strategy. That evening, I returned home before her. I sat on the couch, the notebook open in front of me. 3 days of following her, and the pattern was undeniable. Different people, different meetings, envelopes, folders, whispered exchanges. None of it tied back to the woman I thought I knew. When she finally walked through the door, she smiled, kissed my cheek, and asked what I wanted for dinner. I forced a smile back, my mind racing. I wrote in the notebook later that night. She is hiding something bigger than another man. There is a structure. Older woman, suited man, younger accomplice. Connections. Money exchanged. What role do I play? That question haunted me. The 4th day was when the paranoia began to bleed into my own life. Natalie left home in the morning, and I followed as usual. But halfway through the day, I noticed a car trailing me. Not obviously, but enough to keep me unsettled. Every turn I took, it seemed to appear again in the rearview mirror. A gray sedan with tinted windows. I couldn't shake the thought that maybe Natalie knew I was following her, and this was her way of sending a warning. That day, she met the older woman again. They argued this time, voices sharp even from across the cafe. The woman pointed at Natalie's phone, then left abruptly. Natalie sat alone for 20 minutes, visibly shaken, before leaving. That night, Natalie was unusually affectionate. She curled against me on the couch, played with my hair, whispered about our future. I felt her warmth and thought about the folder, the envelope, the jewelry store, the gray sedan. It was like holding 2 realities at once, one where she loved me, and one where she was planning something that would destroy me. By the 5th morning, I was no longer following her out of curiosity. I was following her because I needed to know how deep the betrayal went. I felt like a man watching a play, every scene adding new characters, new motives, new shadows. And I knew the climax was coming. She dressed carefully that morning, makeup precise, hair styled, a dress I hadn't seen before. She left early, too early for any real work commitment. My stomach sank as I followed her car out of the neighborhood. I didn't know it yet, but that day would end in a hotel parking lot, where the truth would finally collapse everything I thought I knew about her. The 5th day had ended with her car pulling into a hotel lot, but I didn't follow her inside. Not yet. I wasn't ready to confront her. I needed to understand the scope of what I was dealing with. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the sound of her quiet breathing beside me. She looked so peaceful in her sleep, her hand draped across my chest like she hadn't spent the entire day lying to me. I replayed every detail, the folder, the envelope, the jewelry store, Kevin's anxious energy, the older woman's sharp scolding. It wasn't random. It was structured. She was moving like someone following a plan. But what kind of plan involved 3 different people, secret meetings, and enough lies to bury a relationship? The following morning, I told Scott everything. We sat in his garage where he tinkered with his old motorcycle, the air heavy with the smell of oil and metal. He frowned as I described the hotel parking lot. "This isn't just cheating," he muttered. "It sounds like she's wrapped up in something. Maybe illegal. You need to protect yourself." Scott had always been cautious. He told me to check our bank accounts, our joint credit cards, even the small investments we had made together. When I did later that afternoon, my blood went cold. Thousands of dollars had been withdrawn in cash over the past month. Transactions at stores I'd never heard of. Small enough not to trigger alarms, but large enough to hurt if it kept going. I asked Natalie casually that evening if she had made any big purchases lately. She smiled, kissed me on the cheek, and said she was saving for wedding costs. She said it with such smooth confidence that for a split second, I almost believed her. The next day, I trailed her again. She drove to a different part of town, a cleaner neighborhood where everything looked too polished to be real. She parked outside a tall glass building that housed law offices and financial firms. When she walked inside, I waited, nervous but determined. After about an hour, I went in, pretending to be a delivery driver. I caught a glimpse of her through a glass conference room. She wasn't alone. Across from her sat the suited man I had seen at the restaurant, the envelope giver. They weren't eating this time. They were reviewing documents. Natalie was signing papers. He leaned back in his chair like a man in control. I didn't dare stay too long. I ducked out before security noticed me, but I couldn't shake the image of her signing those papers. It wasn't just betrayal of me, it was financial. She was involving herself in contracts, deals, agreements I had no knowledge of. That night, she acted like nothing was unusual. She curled up on the couch with me and watched a sitcom. She laughed at the punchlines, and I laughed with her because it was easier than thinking about the weight pressing on my chest. By now, I had a pattern. The older woman, Patricia, who gave her folders and scolded her. The suited man, who handed her envelopes and contracts. And Kevin, the jittery younger guy who seemed like an accomplice but not in control. 3 different people, 3 roles, and Natalie at the center. On the 6th day, she went back to Patricia. I followed her into a cafe where they sat in the corner. This time, I was close enough to overhear snippets. Patricia's voice was sharp, low. "You're slipping. He'll notice. You need to clean this up before it explodes." Natalie bit her lip, defensive. "I'm handling it." Patricia slammed her palm on the table, making the cups rattle. "No, you're not. He's a liability. If you don't take care of it, I will." I froze in my chair. My stomach twisted. Were they talking about me? About Jacob, the clueless fiancé who might ruin their plans? Natalie hissed something back I couldn't catch, but her tone was venom. Patricia left soon after, her heels clicking against the floor like gunshots. Natalie sat alone, staring into her coffee like the world was crumbling. I drove home that night in silence. If I was the liability Patricia meant, then Natalie was balancing more than an affair. She was balancing a game that involved money, deception, and powerful people. My trust wasn't just broken, it was being used against me. When I opened our apartment door, Natalie was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables. She looked up, smiled, and asked how my day had been. I stared at her, wondering if she even remembered the conversation she'd had hours earlier, or if lies had become so natural that switching faces was second nature to her. Day 7 was when I learned about Kevin's true role. Natalie met him again, this time in a parking garage. They argued in hushed voices, their movements sharp and frantic. I stayed far enough away not to be noticed, but close enough to see Kevin hand her a flash drive. She tucked it into her purse, her eyes darting around nervously. Kevin looked desperate. His hands shook. At one point, he grabbed her arm, begging her for something. She pulled away, cold, dismissing him. He shouted after her, but she didn't turn back. I scribbled in my notebook, flash drive. Tension. Kevin's subordinate. Possibly blackmail. Later, I did some digging on my own. I tracked Kevin's name through social media and found out he had been fired from a tech startup 6 months ago. Rumors suggested he had stolen code, leaked data, something shady enough to ruin his career. If he was tied to Natalie now, it wasn't for love. It was for survival. By then, my paranoia had transformed into strategy. I wasn't just following Natalie, I was building a case. I kept detailed notes, saved photos on a hidden drive, even recorded some of their conversations from afar. I wasn't sure yet what I would do with the evidence, but I knew I needed it. The 8th day brought another turn. Natalie didn't go to her usual meeting spots. Instead, she drove to a suburban house I didn't recognize. She went inside and stayed for nearly 3 hours. I circled the block several times before parking down the street. Eventually, she came out with the suited man. They looked comfortable together, too comfortable. He touched her arm as they walked to the driveway, and she leaned into him like it was natural. They weren't just business partners. They were lovers. The sight burned me from the inside out. My fiancée, the woman who kissed me goodnight, was leaning into another man's touch like it was second nature. All the whispered meetings, all the envelopes and folders, it wasn't just professional corruption. It was personal betrayal. That night, she came home late, claiming she had been wrapping up client work. I stared at her across the dinner table, my fork frozen midair. She was wearing the same dress I'd seen her in at that house. I wanted to scream, to throw the fork across the room and demand answers, but I didn't. Not yet. Because if she thought she was clever, I would be cleverer. If she thought she was hiding a second life, I would bring that life crashing down around her. The 9th day was when the puzzle pieces locked into place. Natalie met with Patricia again, but this time they weren't alone. The suited man joined them at the cafe. The 3 of them sat together, talking in low voices. From my corner, I caught fragments. Words like investors, cover story, timelines. Patricia looked irritated, the man calm, Natalie anxious. When the meeting ended, Patricia stormed off. The man and Natalie lingered. She rested her hand on his knee under the table, smiling in a way she hadn't smiled at me in months. He leaned close, whispered something, and she laughed softly. It wasn't nervous laughter, it was intimacy. I clenched my fists under the table until my nails dug into my palms. That was the moment I knew with certainty. This wasn't just infidelity. It was a double life, orchestrated with precision, pulling money, trust, and time from me while she planned a future with him. On the 10th day, I made my boldest move yet. Instead of simply following, I confronted one of the side characters. Kevin. I caught him outside the same dingy cafe where he often met Natalie. He looked startled when I approached, his eyes darting like a cornered animal. "You're Jacob, aren't you?" he asked before I even introduced myself. His tone was weary, defeated. "She's been using you." I pressed him for answers, but Kevin was cagey. He admitted only that Natalie and the others were building something, and that I wasn't supposed to find out. He said Patricia hated that Natalie was still with me, that she considered me a liability. When I pushed harder, Kevin snapped. "Look, man, I'm in over my head. I don't want trouble, but if you're smart, you'll get out before they ruin you." Then he fled, leaving me with more questions than answers. That night, I lay in bed beside Natalie, her hand resting lightly on my chest as she drifted to sleep. I stared at the ceiling again, my mind racing. Patricia wanted me gone. The suited man had her loyalty and her body. Kevin was the weak link, desperate and dangerous. And Natalie was at the center, spinning lies like a spider in a web. I thought back to Scott's words. Protect yourself. Because whatever Natalie was doing, I was no longer just a suspicious fiancé. I was a target. By the 10th day, I was running on caffeine, adrenaline, and pure anger. Sleep came in fragments. My meals were fast food wrappers piling in the passenger seat of Scott's old Toyota, and my thoughts had narrowed to one relentless thread. I needed the truth. Not pieces, not fragments. The full picture. Natalie's routines had grown predictable. A cafe here, a boutique there, another client dinner, with Patricia or the suited man. But that Friday morning, she dressed differently. A red dress I'd never seen before, heels she only wore on special occasions, and a new perfume that hit my nose when she leaned down to kiss my cheek goodbye. "Big day at work," she said, her smile perfectly casual. I watched her walk out the door and knew I was about to learn everything. I tailed her car through morning traffic, keeping enough distance to avoid suspicion. She didn't take her usual routes. Instead, she drove toward the edge of the city, into a district of hotels and convention centers. Her car finally pulled into the lot of a mid-range business hotel. Nothing flashy, but discreet enough to host all kinds of meetings. I parked 2 rows back, heart pounding. I expected her to be nervous, to glance around, maybe check her phone. Instead, she stepped out of her car with confidence. She smoothed her dress, checked her reflection in the window, and laughed when another car pulled up beside hers. It was him, the suited man. He stepped out, loosened his tie, and leaned in close to her. Not formal, not businesslike. He pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that lasted far too long for a client meeting. She laughed again, tossing her hair, and grabbed his arm like it belonged to her. My chest tightened, but I forced myself to stay still. Anger would come later. Right now, I needed clarity. They walked toward the hotel entrance, but before they went inside, another car pulled into the lot. A beat-up hatchback. Kevin climbed out, looking frazzled as always. He spotted them and hurried over, his face pale. He thrust an envelope at Natalie, his voice raised even from across the lot. She shook her head, refusing. The suited man stepped between them, calm but firm. Kevin grew agitated, waving his hands, demanding something. Natalie hissed something sharp, then snatched the envelope and shoved it into her purse. The suited man put a hand on Kevin's chest and pushed him back gently but firmly, like an adult disciplining a child. Kevin yelled something I couldn't catch before storming off toward his car. He kicked the tire, got in, and sped away. Natalie and the suited man exchanged a look, then laughed like nothing had happened. They walked arm in arm into the hotel lobby. I sat frozen in the Toyota, scribbling in my notebook with shaking hands. Hotel meeting. Public affection. Envelope exchange. Kevin unstable. Financial or legal implications likely. But my pen hovered as I wrote the next line. She has no fear of being seen. She feels untouchable. That was what broke me the most. Not the kiss, not even the laughing betrayal. It was her confidence. She wasn't afraid of me. She wasn't afraid of anyone. I waited in that parking lot for 2 hours, watching cars come and go, until Natalie finally emerged with the suited man. They looked relaxed, satisfied. He kissed her again before heading to his own car. She walked back to hers, scrolling her phone like nothing had happened. I snapped photos from the window. The kiss. The suited man's car. Kevin handing her the envelope. I saved them in 3 different places, on my phone, on a backup drive, and on a hidden cloud account. If something happened to me, I wanted proof to survive. That evening, Natalie came home at her usual time, humming softly as she hung her coat. She greeted me with a kiss, cooked dinner, and asked about my day. I watched her move around the kitchen, smiling at me, laughing at a story about her coworker. And I thought about the red dress, the hotel lobby, the suited man's hands on her waist. I excused myself to the bathroom and stared into the mirror. My reflection looked hollow, eyes bloodshot, jaw clenched. I whispered to myself, "She is not who you think she is. She is destroying you." When I returned, Natalie was plating pasta. She asked if I wanted Parmesan. I nodded, silent, forcing myself to eat. The next day, I decided to go further. Following her wasn't enough anymore. I needed to dig into who this suited man was. Using the photo I had snapped of his car, I traced the license plate through a friend of Scott's who worked in vehicle registration. The name came back, Richard Kane, age 44, corporate lawyer. I searched his firm online, Kane and Associates. Their specialty? Business litigation, mergers, and asset protection. Exactly the kind of man who could hide money, bury contracts, and make liabilities disappear. Suddenly, Patricia's warning about me made more sense. If Natalie was entangled with Kane, then I wasn't just an inconvenient fiancé. I was a financial liability, maybe even a legal one. I spent the weekend piecing together everything I had. Natalie had Patricia, the mentor pulling strings. She had Kevin, the desperate subordinate doing her dirty work. And she had Kane, the powerful lawyer giving her both protection and intimacy. And me? I was the mask, the respectable fiancé, the man she could point to and say, "See, I'm settled, I'm engaged, my life is in order." Meanwhile, behind the scenes, she was siphoning money, building alliances, and planning a future that didn't include me. The rage simmered hotter with every page of notes I added. But rage wasn't enough. I needed a plan. The breaking point came the following Tuesday. Natalie left her phone unattended in the kitchen while she showered. Normally, she never did. I opened it. The lock screen was new, but I had seen her pin enough times to guess. It opened. I scrolled quickly. Most of her messages were deleted, but one thread remained. Patricia. The latest message read, "He's getting suspicious. We can't afford mistakes. Handle it before the weekend." My chest tightened. That he was me. That night, I barely spoke to Natalie. She didn't notice. She was distracted, scrolling her phone, humming to herself. I watched her from the couch, wondering how someone could lie so effortlessly. When she went to bed, I stayed awake. I opened my notebook and wrote across the page in block letters, "Expose everything." No confrontation. No shouting match. No begging her to explain. I would burn her lies down, piece by piece, until she had nothing left. The next 2 days, I worked like a man possessed. I copied every bank statement, every financial withdrawal. I saved the photos from the hotel. I printed Patricia's text. I built a timeline of her lies. On Thursday night, Scott came over. I showed him everything. He stared at the evidence in silence, then finally said, "You're going to destroy her." I nodded. She planned to destroy me first. Friday came again. A week since the hotel parking lot. I followed her one last time. She returned to the same hotel with Kane. Same red dress. Same routine. But this time, I wasn't just watching. I was recording everything. The kiss in the lot. The walk to the lobby. Kevin arriving again, more desperate than before. Another envelope exchange, another argument. Kane pushing him back. I caught it all on video. Natalie thought she was untouchable. She thought she could juggle me, Kane, Patricia, and Kevin without consequence. But she hadn't accounted for the man in the Toyota 2 rows back, with a camera and a notebook filled with every detail of her betrayal. That night, she slipped into bed beside me, her perfume still clinging to her skin. She whispered, "I love you," before drifting to sleep. I lay awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling, knowing that by this time next week, she would lose everything. The weekend arrived like a storm cloud. By then, I had spent 12 nights lying beside a stranger, my mind split between fury and cold calculation. I had everything I needed, the photos, the videos, the bank records, the text messages. I knew who Richard Kane was, I knew Patricia's involvement, and I knew Kevin's role as their desperate errand boy. Now it was about timing. Exposure had to be public. If I confronted Natalie privately, she'd twist it, cry, claim I was paranoid. She was good at that. Too good. No, I needed to burn her mask off in front of the people she feared losing most. Her family, her colleagues, her friends. Natalie's parents had been planning our engagement party for weeks. It was set for Saturday evening in a rented hall near the waterfront. Nearly 50 guests were invited. Family, friends, some of her co-workers, even a few of mine. Natalie was giddy in the days leading up to it, buzzing around the apartment, picking out a dress, rehearsing what she would say when people toasted us. She had no idea I'd turned that party into her execution ground. Saturday morning, I called Scott. He was the only person who knew everything. We met in his garage again, surrounded by the smell of oil and dust. I handed him a USB drive. "If anything happens to me tonight, send this to everyone," I said. Scott looked at me for a long time before nodding. She deserves everything coming to her. That evening, I dressed in a dark suit and tie. Natalie emerged from the bedroom in a shimmering silver dress, her makeup flawless, her smile radiant. She looked at me like we were still the perfect couple. On the drive to the hall, she squeezed my hand, humming softly. I stared out the window, thinking about the hotel parking lot, about Richard Kane's lips on hers, about Patricia calling me a liability. The hall was decorated with white flowers and fairy lights. Tables filled with champagne glasses and trays of appetizers. Guests mingled, laughing, clinking glasses. Natalie's parents beamed when we arrived. Her father clapped me on the back. Her mother kissed my cheek, both of them calling me the perfect son-in-law. I smiled politely, my stomach twisting. If only they knew. The first hour passed with mingling and small talk. Natalie floated through the room like a queen, glowing under the attention. I stayed close but silent, waiting. When the toast began, I excused myself to the back of the hall where a projector was set up for a planned slideshow of engagement photos. I swapped the USB. My USB. The one with everything. I returned to my seat as Natalie's father raised his glass and began speaking warmly about love and family. Natalie smiled, eyes glistening. When he finished, the slideshow began. But it wasn't our engagement photos that appeared on the screen. It was the hotel parking lot. The first photo showed Natalie in her red dress, kissing Richard Kane in broad daylight. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The next photo, Natalie accepting an envelope from Kevin, her expression sharp and calculating. Another photo, Patricia sliding a folder across the cafe table. The room fell silent, except for Natalie's strangled gasp. She shot to her feet, her eyes wide, shaking her head furiously. This isn't what it looks like, she cried. But the slideshow continued. A video now, shaky but clear, of Natalie and Kane embracing in the hotel lot. Kevin yelling in the background. Natalie laughing, careless, untouchable. Her mother's hand flew to her mouth. Her father's face turned red with rage. Guests whispered, some covering their mouths, others staring openly. Natalie's perfect world collapsed in real time. I stood slowly, holding a folder of printed documents. What you've seen on the screen, I said, my voice steady, is only part of the story. I opened the folder and began laying out the bank records. Over the last 2 months, Natalie has withdrawn more than $12,000 from our joint accounts. She claimed it was for wedding costs. In reality, she funneled it into accounts connected to Richard Kane, a corporate lawyer specializing in asset protection. Patricia, her so-called mentor, orchestrated it. Kevin, a disgraced tech worker, ran errands and delivered data. This was not about love. It was about money. About betrayal. About a double life. Murmurs filled the hall. Natalie's father stood abruptly, veins bulging in his forehead. Is this true? He roared at her. Natalie stammered, shaking her head, tears streaking her mascara. No, Dad, it's not like that. Her mother cut her off, her voice sharp with disgust. We welcomed you into this family, and this is what you've done. Natalie reached for me, pleading. Jacob, please, tell them this isn't real. Tell them you edited it. I stepped back. The evidence speaks for itself. The room turned against her instantly. Her friends whispered, some already pulling out phones. A coworker muttered, she's finished. Her father stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Her mother followed, sobbing. Guests trickled out one by one, shaking their heads. Natalie collapsed into a chair, clutching her head, muttering, this can't be happening. But it was. In the days that followed, the fallout spread like wildfire. Photos and videos leaked online, not by me, but by guests who had recorded the projector screen. Natalie's reputation imploded. Her job at the firm ended abruptly. No company would keep an employee caught laundering money and lying so brazenly. Richard Kane distanced himself immediately, issuing a statement through his firm denying any personal involvement with her. He cut her off without hesitation. Patricia wasn't so lucky. Investigations into Kane's firm brought Patricia into the spotlight. Fraud charges followed. She disappeared from public view within a week. Kevin vanished. Word on social media suggested he had fled the city, terrified of being pulled into a legal battle he couldn't win. And Natalie? She tried calling me, dozens of times. At first, sobbing voicemails begging me to meet her. Then angry messages, cursing me, blaming me. Finally, silence. 1 week after the party, I walked into our apartment to find it half empty. Her clothes, her jewelry, her perfume bottles, all gone. On the kitchen counter, a note in her handwriting. You ruined me. I hope you're happy. I folded it carefully and dropped it into the trash. Scott and I sat on his porch that evening, beers in hand. He looked at me thoughtfully. You did it. You burned her world down. I stared at the streetlights flickering on, the weight in my chest finally lifting. She planned to ruin me first. I just got there before she did. Weeks passed. Life began to steady. I returned to work, reconnected with friends I had pushed aside during my obsession. The whispers faded. Natalie became yesterday's scandal, a name people muttered with pity or scorn before moving on. But I didn't move on easily. The images stayed with me. The hotel parking lot, her laughter, her confidence in her lies. I realized I would never look at another partner without remembering how close I had come to being destroyed. And maybe that was my real revenge. Not just that her life was in ruins, but that I had walked away intact, with my money, my reputation, and my sanity still mine. Natalie was left with nothing. No fiancé, no family support, no career, no lover. Just ashes where her double life had once stood. When I closed my notebook for the last time, I wrote one final line. For 5 days, I tracked my fiancé's every move. What I saw in that hotel parking lot destroyed everything. But in the end, it also set me free. And that's the story. If you're still here, that means you're one of us. So go ahead, hit that subscribe button. I drop new chaos every single day, and trust me, tomorrow's story, it's even worse than this one.